Have you ever noticed how, in real life, it's not the most talented or the most likable who gain power? It's always those who understand politics guided by reality, not ideals. The world doesn't reward those who play nice, but those who play it right. And Machiavelli had already warned, better to be feared than loved. Too strong? Perhaps. But look around you. How many times have you been ignored for trying to please, while others, less capable, earned respect? This happens because those who dominate behind the scenes learn that the end justifies the means, and that the appearance of virtue is just a tool, not the ultimate goal. In this video, you'll discover 9 surgical moves, strategies that leaders, entrepreneurs, and even historical figures have used to become indispensable. These aren't empty tricks, but silent blows that transform your social standing without anyone noticing. We'll discuss invisible control, the calculated use of force, the art of avoiding hatred, and even the most dangerous addiction of all, dependence. These are weapons that, when applied well, make people not only respect you, but beg for your presence. So if you're tired of being disposable, if you've realized that simply being good isn't enough, get ready. What you'll learn here isn't cheap motivation, it's strategic survival. These are the same principles that have moved kingdoms, corporations, and even silent friendships within your circle without you even noticing. The difference is that now you'll have this knowledge in your hands, and the question is, are you ready to use it? The first silent coup, the first silent blow never comes with a bang, but with subtlety. It's that decision that doesn't need an announcement, but changes the power position of those who execute it. Machiavelli always reminded us that politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires observing the invisible details, the movements that seem banal, but reorganize the entire board. A simple example: in the workplace, it's not the loudest who earns respect, but the one who observes, records, and, at the right moment, puts strategic information on the table. No shouting, no spotlights, just a quiet move that changes how everyone sees you. It's in this kind of movement that true power is born. Discreet, precise, calculated. The curious thing is that the first silent blow almost always seems harmless to the one who suffers it. And it is precisely this appearance of virtue that makes it so effective. The end justifies the means, said Machiavelli, and when the means is subtlety, the impact is often devastating. Imagine a leader who, instead of publicly confronting a rival, decides to invest in gaining the trust of that same rival's support team. There is no direct confrontation, only a shift in loyalty. Little by little, the enemy's strength dissolves without a single sword raised. The blow was struck, and no one noticed the exact moment the scales turned. This also applies to personal relationships. Sometimes, changing a small habit can upset the dynamic without needing a fight. Now here's the practical application. Ask yourself today what your silent coup would be. Maybe it's starting to document everything that happens around you, or maybe it's cultivating a skill no one expects from you, like learning to speak in public, or even understanding finances, while others are still spending mindlessly. Decisions based on real human nature are always more effective than idealistic speeches. This is where constant adaptability comes in. Those who master the invisible moves dominate the game before others even realize they've started. And of course, after this first silent move, there always comes the need for a new layer, the mask of virtue, which gives power a face acceptable to all. The mask of virtue. The mask of virtue is one of the oldest and, at the same time, most effective weapons. Machiavelli said that a ruler should always appear virtuous, even if his inner intentions were quite different. This isn't hypocrisy. It's strategy. Think about how many times you've seen someone in your social circle who seemed too nice, always helpful, always correct, but who, deep down, was building a network of influence to make themselves indispensable. The appearance of virtue protects the player from direct attacks because no one suspects someone who carries a semblance of purity. It's like an invisible shield that neutralizes criticism before it even appears. In practice, this mask can be applied in various contexts. In the corporate environment, for example, the person who always offers to help, who smiles in meetings, who appears impartial, is often the same person who is noting every weakness of colleagues to exploit when necessary. This calculated use of force, disguised as kindness, builds trust. And when trust is established, the future blow has a multiplied impact. The secret lies in balancing virtu and fortuna, appearing virtuous enough to appear trustworthy, but acting according to reality when the moment demands it. After all, as the saying goes, it's better to be feared than loved, as long as the fear isn't evident too early. And here's a practical exercise. Start cultivating your mask of virtue. If you want to grow, project the image of someone who always delivers, meets deadlines, and is genuinely interested in others. That's the facade. But behind the scenes, organize information, learn to anticipate moves, and study how each person around you reacts under pressure. Read books like Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power, and realize how appearance is always more important than substance in the social game. The point isn't to be fake, but to understand that without this mask, you can become too vulnerable. And it's precisely when everyone believes in your goodness that the next dilemma opens up. After all, is it better to be feared or loved? Better to be feared than loved. Few dilemmas are as widely discussed as this one. Machiavelli famously stated in his work that it is better to be feared than loved, if it is not possible to be both. And that sounds harsh, doesn't it? But let's think about it together. Love is volatile, dependent on emotions that change like the wind. Fear, on the other hand, is anchored in predictability. Those who fear think twice before betraying, hesitate before defying. Decisions based on true human nature show that in times of crisis, people tend to save themselves, even at the expense of those they claim to love. So fear creates an extra barrier, a defense mechanism that protects when the tide turns. Here we are not talking about blind violence, but about strategic respect built around the perception of power. Now, imagine this applied to real life. A boss who seeks only to be liked can end up becoming a hostage to the team, trying to please at every opportunity, avoiding conflict, and ultimately being disrespected. However, someone who earns respect, even if mixed with a certain fear, has their word heard, their orders followed, and their authority preserved. The same goes for personal relationships. The friend who only wants to please loses himself in concessions, while the one who sets firm boundaries, even at the risk of appearing harsh, is respected. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is building a solid posture that inspires more caution than affection. Because, believe me, affection fades, but respect tends to remain. A practical exercise. Start testing your social boundaries. Say no to something you'd normally accept for fear of displeasing. Establish a clear boundary in a relationship and observe the reaction. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, but you'll soon realize that people think twice before crossing your boundaries again. This is the essence of the calculated use of force. No need to yell or punish, just take a firm stance. And when this stance becomes routine, something magical happens. You begin to dance in the invisible territory of control without needing to reveal the ropes that move others. This is precisely where we enter the next step, the dance of invisible control. The dance of invisible control. True power lies not in controlling through brute force, but in moving the pieces without anyone realizing you're the conductor. Machiavelli knew that the best leaders were those who practiced politics guided by reality, not ideals, understanding that the human mind responds more to subtleties than to direct orders. The dance of invisible control is like conducting an orchestra. The musicians play believing they're simply following the score, but it's the conductor, with his small gestures, who sets the pace. This is true at work, in the family, in any social group. Those who master the invisible thread of the narrative are the ones who shape results. And you see, the curious thing is that the more discreet, the more lasting the control. In practice, this manifests itself in very simple ways. Imagine a leader who never gives direct orders, but asks strategic questions. Do you really think this is the best way? Or isn't there a quicker solution? Suddenly, others start to think they came up with the idea on their own, when in fact they simply followed the invisible suggestion. It's as if the mask of virtue meets the calculated use of force, because control isn't imposed, it infiltrates. This is where constant adaptability comes in. Each person has a different point of influence, and the art is figuring out where to touch to move the whole body. Those who master this can even avoid being hated because they're never seen as the manipulator, but rather as the inspirer. You can apply this today. Try replacing an order with a suggestion. Instead of saying, "Do this now," try, "Don't you think if we do this now, we'll gain time later?" See how the response changes. This is the power of invisible control, planting seeds in someone else's mind and letting them blossom as if they were natural. Read books like Robert Cialdini's Influence to understand how subtle persuasion shapes behavior without resistance. When you realize that the crowd follows your rhythm without ever noticing the string that guides them, you understand that true control is silent. But remember, even a conductor needs faithful musicians to keep the melody steady. And that's why the next step is inevitable, having your own loyal armies. Own and loyal armies. Machiavelli always emphasized, never depend on the strength of others to maintain your power. Loyal, dedicated armies are the foundation of any empire that doesn't want to crumble at the first headwind. And here we're not just talking about soldiers with swords, but about people, ideas, and resources that remain by your side because they believe in your command. When you depend on the structure of others, you live trapped by fortune, exposed to instabilities you can't control. But when you build your own group, whether of collaborators, trusted friends, or even loyal clients, you create a solid core of power that's difficult to overthrow. This is the essence of politics, guided by reality, not ideals. Understanding that only those who have their own strength are free. In practice, this means investing in what's yours. Want a current example? Companies that rely too heavily on a single platform, like social media, end up hostage to algorithms that change without warning. Those that build their own email lists, engage communities, and establish brands create their own digital army, loyal and hard to subdue. The same goes for your personal life. Always relying on the goodwill of others is like building on sand. Creating your circle of loyalty, made up of those who truly trust you, is like building invisible walls around your position. Here, the end justifies the means. Investing time, energy, and even resources in building this loyalty can be laborious, but it's what guarantees independence and security. You can start today. If you lead a team, focus on developing people who share your vision rather than simply obeying orders. If you're thinking about business, invest in building a customer base that buys not just the product, but the meaning you convey. Read Simon Sinek's Start with Why and understand how leaders who communicate purpose create nearly unbreakable loyalties. Remember, armies of their own aren't just about numbers, but the quality of loyalty. And when this loyalty is combined with your capacity for action, it creates something Machiavelli called virtù. But virtù alone is never enough. You also need to rely on luck, fortune, which always dances between order and chaos. Virtue and fortune. Machiavelli understood that every ruler lives between two forces. Virtù, which is their ability to act with intelligence, courage, and calculation, and fortune, which is chance, the tide of good or bad luck that no man can completely control. The secret is not in choosing one or the other, but in knowing how to balance the two. Virtue is what you build, your discipline, your skills, your strategic vision. Fortune is the unexpected card that falls on the table, the opportunity that arises out of nowhere, or the crisis no one anticipated. Politics, guided by reality, not by ideals, requires understanding that without virtue, fortune swallows you. But without fortune, your virtue can become sterile, like seed sown on arid ground. Life will always be this interplay of forces. In practice, think of entrepreneurs who built empires. Many had virtue. They knew how to plan, take risks, and learn. But they also found fortune along the way. An investor who believed, a market that exploded, a technology that became accessible. On the other hand, how many geniuses have you met who never got off the ground? This happens because they lacked the luck of being in the right place at the right time. And how many lucky ones squandered their fortunes because they lacked the virtue to sustain what they received? This balance is what separates those who build solid castles from those who merely delight in sandcastles. Better to be feared than loved? Perhaps. But even better is to be respected for your virtue and protected by your fortune. Here's a practical application. Cultivate your virtue daily. Read, learn new skills, and develop your mind to see beyond the surface. Study works like Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragile to understand how some people manage to transform strokes of chance into growth. At the same time, prepare to embrace fortune when it appears. How? By being alert, adapting quickly, and not wasting opportunities. This is constant adaptability, transforming every breath of fate into fuel. When virtue and fortune work together, power ceases to be a game of survival and becomes a game of construction. But for this balance to be maintained, it is necessary to abandon naive ideals and immerse yourself in the politics of reality. The politics of reality, not ideals. Machiavelli shocked the world when he asserted that a ruler should be guided by the politics of reality, not by ideals. This is because ideals are beautiful in speech, but fragile when confronted with real human nature. And herein lies the central point. People are not moved solely by morality or goodness. They are moved by interests, fears, and needs. The end justifies the means, because ultimately what matters is not the beauty of the promise, but the effectiveness of the execution. It's hard to admit, but life rewards those who act based on what is, not what should be. It's like a captain who, faced with a storm, doesn't waste time dreaming of blue skies. He adjusts the sails to avoid sinking. If we look at world politics, we see glaring examples. Leaders who governed with idealistic rhetoric, ignoring economic, social, and military realities, were quickly overthrown. Meanwhile, those who, even when unpopular, made decisions based on practical reality, maintained their power for decades. The same goes for businesses. How many startups fail because they believe in a romantic idea but forget about financial execution? Decisions based on real human nature always trump fancy speeches. That's why Machiavelli insisted it's better to be feared than loved, because love is an ideal, while fear is a tangible reality. And how can you apply this to your daily life? Stop being guided by cliches like follow your heart if the path is full of abysses. Always ask yourself, what real data do I have in my hand right now? If you're investing, don't just be enchanted by inspiring stories, but analyze cold numbers. If you're leading, don't expect everyone to act out of gratitude, but prepare to deal with selfishness and self-preservation. Reading Sun Tzu's The Art of War can help you realize that real strategy always trumps empty idealism. And when you understand that life demands realism to avoid being swallowed up, you realize that even force must be used with calculation, not impulsiveness. The calculated use of force. Machiavelli never advocated unrestrained brutality, but rather the calculated use of force. Misapplied force breeds hatred, instability, and even revolts. Precisely applied force, however, creates respect, order, and security. Think of a surgeon. It's not the violence of the cut that saves the patient, but the precision with which the scalpel touches only where necessary. This should be the case with power. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that excess leads to ruin, while timely application guarantees stability. And remember, sometimes a small display of force, delivered at the right moment, is worth more than 100 long speeches. The end justifies the means, as long as the means are well calibrated. In practice, this manifests itself in a variety of scenarios. A leader who punishes an act of disloyalty in an exemplary manner shows everyone that betrayal has consequences. They don't need to punish every mistake, just the one that sets an example. It's the calculated use of force. A parent who sets clear limits teaches a child respect without constantly yelling. This principle even applies in business. Cutting an unproductive project at the right time can save an entire company. Force here isn't just physical or punitive. It can also be psychological, strategic, and even symbolic. Those who know where, when, and how much to apply it gain respect without resorting to excess. Now, how can you apply this? Start thinking about where you've been wasting energy on unnecessary confrontations. Maybe you're fighting over everything, and it only wears you down. Or maybe you're avoiding applying force when it's necessary, and that's why you're being disrespected. Balance lies in creating impact with minimal exposure. Read Machiavelli's Own the Prince, and notice how he describes the importance of punishing all at once, rather than in several small doses that only fuel resentment. That's the essence, acting little but with profound impact. And when this measure is achieved, power is not only consolidated, but also opens space for the most refined art, the gift of avoiding hatred. The gift of avoiding hatred. Machiavelli always warned, more dangerous than losing love is earning hatred. Being feared can be useful, but being hated is poison for any leader. Hatred breeds silent resentment, invisible conspiracies, and enemies who wait only for the right moment to strike. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that power cannot be sustained when everyone secretly desires its downfall. This is why Machiavelli insisted, use fear, yes, but learn to avoid hatred. How? By balancing firmness with the appearance of virtue. The leader must appear just, even when acting for self-interest. The end justifies the means, but the appearance of those means must be carefully crafted so that resentment does not flourish. In practice, this means punishing without appearing cruel, demanding without appearing tyrannical, and acting with calculation without appearing excessively cold. A simple example. A boss who fires someone without even a minimal explanation seems unfair, generating hatred among the team. However, someone who demonstrates rationality in their decision, making it clear that it was a necessary and not personal measure, avoids sowing the seeds of revolt. In relationships, the same applies. Setting limits is healthy, but humiliating is fatal. It's the difference between respect and resentment. Avoiding being hated isn't about endearing yourself to everyone, but about building an image in which your firmness is seen as necessary, not as abuse. Here's a practical exercise. Observe your own way of asserting authority. Ask yourself, do people respect me or resent me? If the answer leans toward resentment, it's time to adjust your tone. Study non-violent communication techniques, but also learn from works like the 48 Laws of Power, which show how to soften blows so they seem fair. After all, even when force is necessary, it must be applied in a way that seems inevitable, not arbitrary. Those who master this gift avoid conspiracies and remain in control longer. But remember, There is still one last movement, the most dangerous and seductive of all, the addiction to dependence. The last movement, the addiction of dependence. True power lies not only in gaining loyalty, but in creating dependence. Machiavelli knew that when someone needs you to survive, your position becomes almost unshakable. This is the final move, the quietest and yet the most lethal, making yourself indispensable. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that no one is loyal simply out of kindness. People are loyal because they have something to lose if you disappear. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is simple. Build relationships in which you become the source of what the other person values most, be it protection, knowledge, access, or even status. From there, their very survival guarantees your power. See how this plays out in the real world. Companies create closed ecosystems where customers can no longer leave without losing a lot. Think about Apple. It's not just about the iPhone, it's about an entire system that traps the user through convenience. Governments also apply this. Social benefits or state jobs that keep millions dependent on the public machine. This even happens in personal relationships. Those who become the other's source of emotional or financial security create an invisible web of control. This is the calculated use of force in its most refined form, not by direct imposition, but by the addiction of necessity. Better to be feared than loved, perhaps, but better still is to be indispensable, because even love and fear dissolve when dependence sets in. Now, how to apply this without falling into overreach? Start becoming a reference in something. It could be at work, mastering knowledge no one else has. In business, creating a product or service that solves real, hard-to-replace pain points. Or even in relationships, being the one who offers clarity, vision, and firmness when everyone else offers only confusion. Read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich to understand how to build authority that generates magnetism. Remember, dependence isn't forced, it's built. When everyone knows that losing you means losing more than they can afford to risk, you become essential. And this is the pinnacle of Machiavellian play, when they beg for your presence because they can't live without it. Now you know the 9 Machiavellian moves that transform any ordinary person into someone indispensable. But the question is, what good is knowing all this if you continue living as if you were replaceable? How many times have you sacrificed yourself trying to please, believing that kindness would be enough to earn respect? And how many times has this only led to your oblivion? The truth is harsh. Those who don't apply these principles end up serving the game of those who master them. So I ask you, where do you want to be? Will you continue to be manipulated by decisions based on the true human nature of others? Or will you take control of the board and make them beg for your presence? Are you willing to abandon naivete, don the mask of virtue when necessary, use force with calculation, avoid hatred, and above all, make yourself indispensable? Because if you don't, you'll remain trapped by fate, waiting for a fortune that will never come. If any part of this video resonated with you, it's because there's already a voice inside you calling for transformation. The next step is to apply it. Try a silent coup tomorrow. Set a firm boundary. Observe how others react, and then come back here to share what happened. I want to read your comments, because each experience is a new layer of learning. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue learning how to become indispensable in this power game that no one admits they're playing, but everyone is.